Fuck you! Fuck you and fuck you!
Last Draw Podcast. This is Dean and Adam. It's their show. Dean and Adam, what are you guys planning on doing today?
Absolutely nothing.
Arguing with each other?
So it's like an episode of Seinfeld mixed with First Take. This should be good. These guys, they talk about boxing for about 30 to 40 minutes, and they argue various topics. They get scored, judged, and countered by me and each other. And we'll see who has the better episode at the end. Guys, are you ready to go?
Yeah, sure.
Ready.
Okay, good. Dean, you might want to wake up a little bit, like drink some coffee or something.
I'm fucking dying, man.
Well, you and our next fighter have something in common because something is dying with both of these guys. Sergey Kovalev and Adonis Stevenson.
Make the fucking fight happen.
Guys, these guys have circled each other for long enough, and by long enough, I mean longer than 3 months, and now boxing fans are itching, choosing sides, hating on one. Sergey Kovalev and Adonis Stevenson. Who wins this match, should it, if it ever happens? Dean, why don't you go first, since you're dying and we want you to speak before you die.
So yeah, I think Adonis Stevenson wins this fight simply because in the last couple of outings, Kovalev has looked, if you can take his power, he definitely looks vulnerable. Pascal's shown that he's able to be punched and be punched hard. I think in that situation, if it's Stevenson landing that punch and not somebody like Pascal, then Kovalev's going to sleep, same as anybody else in the division. I mean, Stevenson is also vulnerable, but he's never been, I wouldn't say Kovalev's been in there with somebody who can test that chin properly, and I think Stevenson would make him go. That's my argument anyway. I think he's been in there with people like Beaker, and he managed to knock. Was it Beaker he managed to knock over? And Fonfara. He's been in there with some top guys at the weight, and Kovalev seems to be sort of dawdling around people like Pascal, rematching Pascal when he don't need to be doing it. People are critical about Stevenson and his caliber of opponent, but there's absolutely no need for a Pascal rematch. I do think Stevenson would probably knock him out.
All right. What about you, Adam?
So, first of all, Sakio Bika is not even a top fighter at 168, let alone 175. But let's put that aside for a minute.
Yo, she ain't recognize your ass, man.
So here's why I think Kovalev wins the fight. And let me be clear, I don't think that this is some clear, obvious. I'm not, betting my mortgage on Sergey Kovalev if this fight happens. But the reason, if I had to bet, I'd put my money on Kovalev is this. One is I think he's got more wrinkles to his game. So Adonis Stevenson is basically just a straight left-hand spammer. I mean, that's what he wants to do. He waits to set up that punch. He has a lot of success with it, and good for him. But he's never really shown an ability to add some more wrinkles to that game. And he's always looking to land that sledgehammer left. And if he doesn't, get those opportunities, he doesn't look as good. I think Kovalev has slightly better power. I think the fact that he's a more active fighter, that he throws more punches around. Is
that because he's killed somebody in the ring?
Yeah, well, hey, that's the highest level of activity
question,
there
man.
Can be. I think he's faced slightly better opposition. Frankly, neither of these guys have faced great opposition. But two things that I would sort of wrap it up with. One is I think we've seen that Stevenson can be hit and put down. I mean, he went down against Fonfara. He took a straight right on the chin and fell on his ass. And, just to turn your argument around on you, if that's Sergey Kovalev landing that punch, he's not getting up. And the last thing is Stevenson is 38 years old. People forget this. He's 38 years old, which is, especially for a bigger fighter, that's pretty old. And so if I got to put my money down, I'm putting it on Crusher.
I just think the power that he's talking about is you're basing it on the fact that somebody unfortunately died in the ring facing him. It's an accident. It happens. You don't have to be a massive puncher to die from punishment in the ring.
Shit is fucked up in the boxing world.
I think Stevenson's displayed one-punch power more than Kovalev has. Kovalev's a clubbing puncher. I wouldn't say he's like a single-punch knockout specialist like you could call Stevenson.
Yeah, but he's knocked everybody out. At the top levels of the sport, with the exception of Bernard Hopkins, who nobody knocks out Bernard Hopkins.
Well, he couldn't knock out a 50-year-old Hopkins.
Yeah, he couldn't knock out one of the best defensive fighters of a generation. That's not that big a black mark.
A generation that's already gone.
Everybody thought that Jean Pascal had this iron chin before that fight, and he cracked Pascal's iron chin.
No, they didn't.
And he's got knockouts in all of his other fights at championship
Who are these people
level.
that thought Pascal had a cast iron chin?
There were people who were writing articles about his George Chuvalo-esque chin
and those
before that fight.
And I learn what boxing is. Need to listen to what they're fucking saying.
Those people might have a screw loose, but the point is people thought that Pascal had this epic chin. Kovalev has proven that he's got that kind of power. Everybody talks about that power. And the thing is that he has it in both hands, not just in that one, straight punch that Stevenson's always looking for.
I'm going to jump ahead here and kind of like show cards on what's to come. But let me ask you guys this. When was Manny Pacquiao's blaze of glory? When would you guys say it was? I mean, generally agreed upon, it's when.
I'd say, what do you mean?
When Pacquiao was at his peak, yeah.
Miguel Cotto.
2000, about Cotto. Anytime between
2009.
Yeah, probably about 2009, 2010.
So I'm looking for a range. So I would say that it's from 2005 to 2009. When he was jumping the weight classes, when he was blitzing through these guys and knocking guys out. Because after Cotto, he stopped knocking guys out very often.
Yeah, I mean, what was that?
But the point I'm making here is that Pacquiao did that, a one-handed fighter. He used his right hand very seldomly.
I wanted to say that, but Pacquiao attacked differently. He didn't.
Not by that point. I mean, look at Ricky Hatton. That first knockdown in the Hatton fight was that Manila Ice, they called it, the right hook. Like, that was the whole point.
It was a fucking left hand.
Added that wrinkle to his game.
It was a left hand.
But the point I'm making here is that Stevenson, like Pacquiao, have one weapon that they know works, and their entire game plan's built around that weapon. And it's not that much of a hindrance if you can get to the level that they've gotten at using that weapon.
Yeah, if you can land it, then shit, go for it, yeah.
But what separates a guy like Stevenson from a guy like what separates Pacquiao from a guy like Stevenson, what puts him at that, great level, whereas Stevenson's just good, is that he had other wrinkles to his game. He had that speed, the speed freak aspect, and he had a pretty good right hook.
They came later. You can't say that Pacquiao was very dynamic very early on in the game, and he suffered for it when he fought Morales. But let's just get things clear. Kovalev's no Eric Morales.
Well, sure. A few people are.
At this point, yeah. So whoever wants to stop putting their microphone in their mouth, that would be good. Now, I'm not going to score it. I'm going to leave it up to the people who listen to score that one. Let's jump
That's
on.
Adam then, because everybody hates Stevenson because he's a Heyman fighter.
That's probably true. So
that and the women beating.
Oh well,
the pimping.
What about the racism?
Well, I know. I love it that both of these guys have like kind of weak opposition and are like genuinely hateable people, and we get to debate them. It's fun.
And notice that the black one is the one who's hated. Just saying. I'm just saying.
You're not wrong.
Guys, who is the greatest Mexican fighter of all time? Dean, you went first last time, so Adam, it's your turn to go first.
Canelo.
So I'm going to go out on a limb and say that it is not Canelo Alvarez. I'm going to go with Julio Cesar Chavez, Sr., not Jr., in case anyone was wondering. If you look at the dude's resume, he had, 29 title defenses over his career, famously had 86 straight wins. But when I was looking it up, so you look at
every kid at the Boys and Girls Club.
Well, but if you look, but more importantly, he had 8 years where he was clearly the best fighter in the division. If you look at the Ring Magazine's rankings, he's the top guy in the division he was fighting in for 8 years in a row, which is not something that happens pretty frequently. And if you look at the resume, wins over people like Rocky Lockridge and Edwin Rosario. I know we debated this last time, but I'll count it for these purposes. Meldrick Taylor, Hector Camacho, he's got that kind of resume. He defended the title so many times. He marched up in weight, but unlike most people, didn't sort of go too far weight-wise, at least not in his prime. And and had a long reign where he was clearly the best guy in the division and clearly one of the best pound-for-pound fighters in the game. And so while Mexico has produced a ton of great champions, I think Chavez nips it for me.
All right, Dean.
I'm going to go with Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. Simply. No.
Oh, I guess he's the greatest fighter of all time, named Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. But as
I think
far
you could
as
probably find somebody that could beat him to it.
you might be able to.
All right, for real, I'd say Juan Manuel Marquez.
Oh, there goes Brandon.
Ooh.
Simply because,
Ooh.
because I'd like to counter the argument he had with those, was it 24 title defenses or 24 title fights? He didn't
29.
really fight. He didn't fight top level opposition, and I think it was rare that he fought any top level opposition. He had a very, very padded record. I mean, I'm a fan of Chavez.
86 wins.
Yeah, I'm a fan of Chavez, but it's a padded record. I mean, Wilder got a world title fight from, was it 30 people they found on the street? And you can argue about Marquez as well. He holds wins over all-time greats.
Who
Like
other
what?
than Pacquiao?
Well, not Floyd Mayweather.
Pacquiao 3 times.
Come on. So who other than Pacquiao does he have wins over that you think is an all-time great?
Yo, she ain't recognize your ass, man.
Pacquiao 3 times.
There's one that you're
Are you
missing, but even that one's debatable.
Go
If
on.
you're talking about Barrera, it's not.
You don't think? Well, obviously, it's not debatable that Barrera is great. It's debatable that Barrera in 2008 or whenever that fight was still great.
Yeah, but then you're arguing the same thing over people like Camacho.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of so you were talking
Besides,
about all the
also-
cab drivers from Tijuana that you
Yeah,
know, everybody famously
also,
talks about Chavez.
Marquez has fought at a higher level, and he's won titles in more weight classes as well. He's always been on pound lists.
Here's what I look at. If you compare their top 5 wins, so the top 5 wins, I think you'll probably agree with me for
Chavez. Well, let's do Chavez. Do Chavez.
All right, so for Chavez, okay, fine.
Meldrick
I'd say
Taylor.
Rocky Lockridge, Juan Laporte,
Who?
Edwin Rosario, Meldrick Taylor, and Hector Camacho. And depending on if you don't want to count Meldrick Taylor, then maybe you throw Roger Mayweather in there.
I'd say one of them is a great fighter. One of them.
The top 5 for Marquez, you got Pacquiao.
Pacquiao again. Pacquiao
You got
a third
Barrera.
time.
You got an older Barrera, and then we really start to get a little dicey. We're talking about Juan Diaz, maybe Joel Casamayor, Orlando Salido, like good fighters, but rugged guys, not great fighters. So if you're trying to compare top wins too, I think, yeah, sure, Chavez beat up a lot of cab drivers from Tijuana, but it was a different era when guys used to do that.
To maintain a top level longer than Chavez was.
What about this
Chavez
question
started
here?
flying.
Who has decisively beaten Marquez in their career?
Mayweather. That's it.
I think if you're going to argue for Marquez, that's the crux of the whole argument. I mean, apart from, his DQ in his first fight ever, Marquez has only been beaten decisively once. And, I mean, the Freddie Norwood fight was arguable. Chris John, that wasn't – they were in Indonesia, so –
do we not count that one?
We're not going to count that one.
Yeah, but then you can argue Pacquiao 1 was a Marquez win. You can argue Pacquiao 3 was a Marquez win. Pacquiao 4 is obviously a Marquez win. Bradley, you could have gone either way.
Right. So, I mean, you could say that Mayweather is the only one that's ever truly beaten up Marquez.
Yeah, and he's the only Marquez has said Mayweather's the only person who he thought truly beat him. He said he thought he had an argument for every other fight that he apparently lost or didn't win. So with Chavez, there was a lot of fights that Chavez fought when he was coked up or when he was an alcoholic or whatever the fuck he was doing, that he was fighting and he was losing those fights. Like Marquez was able to maintain a higher level of opposition a lot longer than Chavez was.
I think when we're looking at the highs, Chavez takes it because Marquez does have so much controversy surrounding his career, and his opposition is debatable. What was Chavez's high then? Well,
Go on, you tell me what Chavez's high was.
the win over Taylor, Camacho, and then drawing with Whitaker, who was at the time, I think, the best pound for pound fighter in the sport.
Okay, so he actually lost to Whitaker. If you're gonna make points about bullshit decisions, talk about the two that Marquez has to Pacquiao. Because Pacquiao was a pound for pound fighter, arguably the best in the sport. One of the times he lost to him when Mayweather was retired.
I'd say that Chavez
You want to talk about shit like that. You can't compare and contrast and then say, oh, one of them's got dodgy decisions, but Chavez had a draw. It doesn't work like that.
No, it does. It's the same point for each guy. It's the same point for each guy where they have fights where the decisions were controversial, but if you put it in their favor each time.
Okay, what about the Pacquiao knockout?
Well, we're not going to talk about the Pacquiao knockout because it wasn't a decision.
And that's included
in Marquez's argument for why he's over Chavez.
Yeah, and frankly, if he doesn't have that, if it's, say he won a decision over Pacquiao in that fight rather than a knockout, I think that absent the knockout, the argument's a hell of a lot harder for Marquez. The fact that he has the knockout makes it a reasonable argument between the two.
You could say that for Chavez. You could say, oh, imagine if they let Taylor finish the fight and Chavez lost a split decision.
Well, I mean, the better one is imagine if Chavez didn't get hooked on drugs or whatever.
Let's not get crazy now.
5 fights against nobody's. You can argue it 2 and 4, but Marquez has won titles in more divisions. He competed at a top level a lot longer than Chavez was able to.
You say that he competed at a top level longer. Where does that come from?
Titles he fought for at the age he fought.
Chavez was a pound for pound fighter for years and years and years. For 8 years was the top fighter in his division. You can't say that about Marquez.
Yes, you can. You can argue that Marquez was a pound for pound fighter.
Not for as long as Chavez was, and the entire time he was in the shadow of other fighters who were better than he was at the division.
From fighting Barrera and Diaz and Pacquiao, all the way up to the Tim Bradley fight, where people had him ranked on Reddit as number 3 in the sport. You're telling me that's not the same length of time?
No, I'm not saying he was never there. I'm saying he wasn't there for as long. I'm saying Chavez was there longer.
Same length of time.
No, I don't think so.
Depending on when we want to recognize that Marquez was one of the top pound for pound in the sport, I don't think it comes until maybe 2006, because in 2004 he loses to Pacquiao, or they have the draw first, and then in 2006 he loses to Chris John. So I think, and then in 2008 he loses to Pacquiao again. So somewhere in that range he got put in the pound for pound discussion. Because whether he was losing or not, he was competitive.
Why would he be in that pound for pound discussion?
I think we're looking at an eye test sort of thing. I mean, if we're looking at
the only win in that range that even matters is Barrera, and the others are.
You can argue the same thing about Chavez.
No, Chavez never had a streak of dominance the way Marquez never had a streak of dominance that.
Because the level of opposition was higher. He fought an old Camacho, and then
a slippery slope. I mean,
from fighting Meldrick Taylor, he fought Akwe Ado, Russell Mosley, Jamie Balboa, fucking Kyung Duk-han, John Duplessis, Tommy Small, Lonnie Smith, Ignacio.
We're just trying to figure out
Lee Car Ramos, that people don't Michael Katsidis, Juan Diaz, who's lost 3 of his last 5. You can make the argument both ways to pick apart their resume, so we're going to move on.
This is who he's fought in a row. This isn't me picking names off a list. This is the list. This is how it goes after that win.
Okay, so we're moving on I have
the killer. Wait, I have the killer argument.
So you've got between Taylor and Camacho is 3 years. 3 years. And then between that, nobody. Greg Hogan, nobody. Whitaker, draw.
Marquez's problem is that he was never able to build momentum because he would get himself into fights where he'd either have a controversial decision or he'd lose.
Here's the argument then. What's momentum? How do you build momentum? Do you fight 87 fucking cab drivers and build momentum?
Well, that's one way to do it. The other way is to have like
title,
5 consecutive wins where your last 6 on BoxRec doesn't have a red circle.
Adam. Yeah, and it's to not lose to people like Chris John and Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather.
Why in 1992 was Chavez fighting a guy who'd lost his last 6 fights, who was 10-10-1? if he was supposedly a pound for pound fighter? Why was he fighting guys like that?
Why was Marquez fighting Juan Diaz, who was 3-3 in his last 6 fights in 2010, and he had already knocked him out a year earlier?
0 for 6, 10, 10 and 1. What sort of level of opposition is that for a pound for pound fighter? You tell me.
What sort of opposition is Turd Sack Kokietjim? That's what I want to know.
Oh, he was a real good fighter at the time, who actually fought Orlando Salido last year in a really good fight. Let's move on to Carl Froch versus George Groves in their first fight. One of the most controversial events we've had in recent memory, just seeing how it led to such a huge rematch. Now, was the stoppage fair? I don't know if that's how you guys wanted me to word this question, but that's how it's going to be worded. So, Dean, why don't you go first?
Absolutely not. Completely unfair, because Froch was in a much worse condition in the first round. He was, Groves' legs were going, or if you could argue they were gone. But the punishment Froch had taken all the way through that fight, he was in worse standing. The first round, he was dropped and he was all over the place at the bell. If there was another 30 seconds in that round, Froch would have been stopped. And then in the 6th round, I think it was the 6th anyway, Froch was all over the place. He was getting hit cleanly by shots, and I've seen fights that have been stopped for less. But then, because Groves had a reputation for being chinny, for no reason at all, other than the fact that he's took a few punches and he doesn't have this cast iron chin that Froch has, the first sign 9 rounds in or 8 rounds in or wherever it was that he started taking punches, the referee jumped on it and stopped the fight. It was premature. If you're gonna let Froch go on in the condition he was in, then you've got to at least return the favour at the first sign of danger for Groves, because it wasn't like he was all over the place. He got caught with maybe 1 or 2 clean shots and his legs buckled a bit. He got put under pressure and got stopped. Froch was down on the canvas. When he got up, his legs were gone, completely gone. And he got landed cleanly on the bell as well.
He has gone there!
And then he's shown nothing for the next 6 rounds.
I'm not sure where you're getting the information. Why did you say that George Groves was known as chinny? He wasn't. He'd never been down at that point in his career.
He had a reputation for being chinny. He did have a reputation for being chinny.
Never been down before, but go on.
He had a reputation for being chinny. He said it himself in interviews.
Well, that's kind of stupid.
Yeah.
Well, you should have never said that, Dean. That just ruined your whole argument, because now it comes out to George Groves is an idiot.
Off. That's bullshit. That's bullshit.
George Groves is an idiot. He might have hurt himself in that regard.
Still should have been stopped.
Go on, Adam.
So, unlike my counterpart here, I'm actually going to be consistent with our argument from the first episode on this. And I'm going to say, I'm going to agree with him, though, that yes, the stoppage was terrible. But here's why. So for me, you're going to be pretty hard-pressed to convince me that stopping the fight when somebody is standing up and standing up straight is the right thing to do. Now, if somebody's wobbling, if somebody's eyes are completely glazed over. So as an example, Peter Quillen, when he got sparked by Danny Jacobs, there was some controversy in some circles about whether or not that stoppage was good. I thought that stoppage was fine, because if you looked at his face, that dude was not on this planet. He was taking a nap somewhere and his body was just managing to wobble around in the canvas. But if you look at that fight with Groves and Froch in that last round of the fight, they're both kind of going for broke and swinging, and Groves is, shelling up a little bit and taking some shots and getting wobbled, and Froch looks tired as hell and his arms are down and he's swinging for the fences. And it's one of these weird sort of slugfest fights. Like, Groves is no doubt in trouble. I don't really doubt that if that fight goes on a whole lot longer, that he might actually get knocked down legitimately and get knocked out legitimately. But you need to let the fight play out for that to happen. And this was one of those classic sort of stepping in too early. And this is the kind of stuff that makes people think shady shit about boxing, because, Carl Froch was favored to win that fight and had been down earlier and had a scare. And if you want to be a conspiracy theorist, you would say, aha, they looked at and found an opportunity to step in and save the man that, everybody thought was going to win this fight from this danger. But if you just look at the knockdown, forget who it is, forget what had happened for the non-knockdown, If you look at the knockout itself, Groves is standing up straight. He's shelled up, taken some shots, but he hasn't given up the ability to defend himself, and that's the wrong call. And we've seen it, unfortunately, all too often in boxing.
Groves felt the referee jumped in too soon because his ability to take a good punch has been questioned several times in the past, and Froch is regarded as a very heavy puncher. I feel like the ref got it wrong, Groves said. There's no way it should have been stopped. It's a bitter pill to swallow. I think I'm a victim of my chinny reputation and a victim of Froch's supposed punching power. So I'm not making this shit up. You can't fucking sit there and tell me that my argument got ruined. He said that in the ring after the fight.
Did he say it before?
Possibly. I don't fucking know.
I mean, it's more important to look before because you're looking at the expectation that the referee had, not after the fact that the referee's going to say, oh, well, George Groves is chinny. Is that knowledge that the referee had prior to the fight? What's that?
Reputations come into play.
Well, that's what I want to know. Was that something that was out there, something that Groves had said before the fight? That's when it's more important to hear that. So let's move on to the next one, guys.
Down previously.
Chain recognize your ass.
Let's move on to the next one. Should there be a rule change to prevent what is becoming at times pretty prevalent in boxing, and that is that guys are clinching, it seems, more than ever? So, should a rule change be made? Who went first last time? The other one go first.
My turn first this time. No, I don't think there should be a rule change because there's already a rule that says that you can't clinch excessively in a fight. I think that a rule clarification would be helpful. So I'm not one of these people who thinks that any clinching whatsoever is some sort of horrific thing to watch. There are parts of boxing that involve that kind of infighting and wrestling and clinching and one arm and a guy's got a hand free. Some of that stuff is interesting to me to watch and fun to watch, and you see guys who use it skillfully, and it's a part of the game. And so there are some kinds of clinching that are fine, and then there are instances, plenty of them, and I would agree with people when they say it's excessive in some fights, where guys use it as a tactic to sort of prevent themselves from having to engage in any kind of fight or skill or exchange at all. And Vladimir Klitschko is a perfect example of it. Great fighter. I'm not trying to take anything away from him in that sense.
Yes, you are.
But he used it as a strategic weapon that, he wanted to stay on the outside and throw those 1-2s and maybe drop a hook in there once in a while. And if things ever got a little bit close, he would just reach out, pull the guy in and clinch and then wait for the separation. That's where it becomes a problem because, I'll use an analogy in basketball. You'll like this one, Angelo. That we see this trend now where people intentionally foul shitty free throw shooters because the expected value.
Andre Drummond, DeAndre Jordan.
Exactly.
Make your free throws, guys.
Andre Drummond of my Pistons, right? Because he can't make his free throws, they foul him, and they know that they've got only a 35% chance that Detroit's going to get even a point out of it, and so. People use that as a tactic, and it makes the game awful to watch. And so there's all kinds of talk in basketball about, well, maybe we give the option of a team that's been intentionally fouled that you could give up, don't do the free throws, just take the ball side out so that the other team doesn't get an advantage from doing something that they're theoretically not supposed to do.
All right, Adam,
so just
you've gone too long. What's a too long didn't listen?
You asked me if there should be a rule. I'm telling you there shouldn't be a rule. There should be a clarification, just like there should be in the NBA.
Very nice. Dean?
I agree that there should be some clarification on the rule. I don't think that it should be changed. Because I agree that a fighter in dangerous trouble who's wobbly or he's just got up from a knockdown should be able to hold on and clinch the end of a round. I have no issue with that whatsoever. However, what I have an issue with are the referees, because the referees know the Queensberry rules and they know that they need to, they get told to enforce them. And then when you've got Klitschko versus Povetkin, when the clinch count was 130 something over 12 rounds, that, what was Luis Pabon doing? He didn't deduct a point until 11 rounds in. After it'd been Povetkin, the smaller Povetkin had been leaned on 100 and however many fucking times at that point. It's just too much. Certain fighters will do that, but it's the referee's job to enforce it. There shouldn't be a rule change at all. It's just up to the referees. It's gross incompetency if a referee won't deduct a point for excess clinching.
Well, and you can see why they get gun shy in doing it. So another example is the Lamont Peterson Amir Khan fight, when Amir Khan had 2 points deducted, I guess, for pushing off. Now, pushing off is technically against the rules. Like the ref wasn't
pushing
wrong.
Off, he was shoving. Let's
He
get
did the same thing against Garcia.
I mean, call it what you want. It was, and again, this is definitely a tactic that Amir Khan uses. That when people get too close, he wants to put him out of range, and he pushes. And Klitschko does the same thing. By the way.
Hook?
But the point is that ref got savaged after that fight because of the point deductions, even though Khan technically did break the rules. And so you can see why some of these refs don't want to really strictly enforce the clinching rule, because they're going to be taking off 30 points from guys like Vladimir Klitschko. So that's why having a clarification like that and encouraging people to start enforcing it a little bit more tightly, not all at once, but gradually, so that people can adjust their styles to it, I think would be helpful.
Do you think Klitschko's a dirty fighter?
Who cares? Does Danny Garcia deserve the universal hate and
I'm asking a serious question. Do you think Klitschko's a dirty fighter?
You get one word, Adam.
No.
All right, good. Does Danny Garcia deserve the universal hate and criticism that he tends to receive? And I'm just going to call it out right now because I know it's coming. It's his hairline. Yeah, we know. So go on, Dean.
No. He shouldn't get the criticism he does get, simply because he's a PBC fighter. He's a Heyman fighter. That's why he gets the criticism he gets, because he fought a guy like Rod Salka. But every top fighter fights a dud opponent at some point.
Like Chavez.
So why should Garcia get it? Yeah, like anybody, like Klitschko fighting fucking Lee Pye, or Mayweather fighting Berto, or Pacquiao fighting Bradley a third time. You can call it what you want. It's bullshit. Anybody who criticises Danny Garcia for shit like that, they're stupid. They don't know what they're talking about. They're just hating. He's a multi-weight world champion. He's unbeaten. He knocked out the lineal 140 fighter.
I guess that is the path to getting hated, because Stevenson knocked out the lineal light heavyweight guy. Hated. Garcia knocks out the lineal super lightweight.
Stevenson raped kids or whatever the fuck he did.
I like how every time you
like
talk to somebody, Stevenson's crimes just get worse and worse. Next episode, I'll accuse him of something even worse.
Stevenson dug up a graveyard and pissed on him. I don't care. Garcia didn't do anything like that. Why should he get the universal hate that you call it? Why should he get that?
Go ahead, Adam. Why do you hate Danny Garcia?
So I don't hate Danny Garcia. I agree he doesn't deserve universal hate. I think it's interesting to look at what it is that's sort of the cause of all of this. And it's funny to me that it all basically comes in one relatively short time frame, if you look at it. And it's essentially just a couple of fights. It's the Mauricio Herrera fight, which obviously was controversial because people thought that he got outworked in that and got the decision. And then it's the Rod Salka fight. And listen, everyone agrees that was one of the most absurd mismatches that we've seen in recent years at the top levels of the sport. And Rod Salka got, he certainly bore the brunt of it when he got knocked out like that. But that's really all it is. That, and I guess you could maybe say after Matisse knocks out Peterson with that badass left hook, and everybody thought, Matisse is this just unstoppable monster before the two of them had fought. Danny Garcia is at ringside smiling like a fucking goofball, and everybody's putting up gifs that say shook on them and stuff.
No, he wasn't smiling. He was looking scared. That's what everybody thought.
Yeah, but it's these three things, and that's about it that actually make people hate him. Yeah, the hairline. Yeah, his father's an asshole, whatever. But I mean, if you look at his resume is really, really, really good. He's got wins over Nate Campbell, Kendall Holt, Eric Morales twice, obviously Amir Khan, Matisse, Peterson, Zab Judah, I guess.
Herrera, who I think is a very
Herrera, there you go.
Fighter. I hate when people disrespect Herrera and they talk about him like he's a journeyman.
Didn't you score that fight?
And so I think that he gets all this hate because of those like couple little incidents, which is sort of funny to me. And the Salka thing, you know, people didn't know it at the time, but it was obviously just Heyman burning out the contract. And it's funny how much lasting hate there is because of it.
Did you score the Herrera Garcia fight, Adam?
I did, yeah.
Who did you score it for?
I scored it for Garcia. I think it was 115, 113. I don't remember now. The actual score, but yeah.
You got a lot of shit for it as well, didn't you?
I did get a lot of shit for it. But if you look at my round by round on that, you can see in each one of the rounds, at the end, I'm like, fuck, man, I don't know. I guess 10-9 Garcia because he landed some more
significant blows. I completely agree with you. I think criticism is completely unwarranted. It was an ugly fight to score. But at the same time, did Herrera really beat the champion? And does Garcia really deserve the level of criticism he gets? He's a pound-for-pound fighter.
Let me ask you guys this question. Do you think anybody's ever rewatched the Garcia-Herrera fight for fun?
For fun? No, certainly not. People have watched it so that they can start arguments about the scoring.
Exactly.
Does anybody ever watch a fucking Mickey Bay fight for fun?
The Molina one, maybe. Maybe. And that's a stretch. All right, so what will Manny Pacquiao be remembered for in 30 years?
I think he'll be remembered for marching up the weight classes, knocking lots of people out, having lots of exciting fights, and putting together one hell of a career for himself. I think he'll probably be remembered for being a part of the biggest event that the sport ever had in Mayweather-Pacquiao. And it's funny because he doesn't really get a lot of hate for how that fight went. Everybody seems to sort of blame it on Floyd and just say, oh, it's Floyd's fault because he himself for not being a particularly scintillating performer in that fight himself and getting shut down by the superior. Anyway, he's going to be remembered for being that hard-charging speed freak, knockout guy who went up in weight and a lot of people in doing it.
What do you think, Dean?
I think it can be remembered one of two ways. He'll still be the only 8-division world champion in 30 years' time. I'm pretty sure of that because it's just freakish. I think the closest to it is 6. So, 8-division world champion in a sport that, it doesn't have a lot of divisions. It's not like it has like 30 divisions. It's a great achievement. He'll always be remembered for that. Because it's not going to be matched anytime soon, if at all. But he can also be remembered as this generation's Tommy Hearns. He lost his 2 biggest fights. He's a pound-for-pound fighter, fantastic fighter, but he lost when it mattered. He lost to Mayweather decisively, and he lost his quadrilogy with Marquez decisively.
Fair enough. And currently, guys, which undefeated fighter can least afford to take a loss right now?
Am I going first on this one or Dean?
I'll go first if you want.
Go ahead.
I say Golovkin.
Now, what happens if Golovkin loses, do you think? That makes him, number one here. Because
people instantly thought, people will come out of the woodwork and say, oh, you know what? People who were saying he'd never fought any elite level opposition, any top tier opposition, you know what? They were all right. He was a hype job. Everybody was just bandwagoning on him because he was knocking guys out. Because he's not fought anybody other than Lemieux, who's a name, and Lemieux's not an elite fighter. Lemieux's barely a champion fighter. He had a belt because he's in a dead division.
He actually had a belt because he managed to knock down Hassan N'Dam quite a few times. Otherwise, he might not have won that fight.
But he's not fought anybody with a big name. His pay-per-view sold the same amount as fucking 180-year-old Roy Jones and Bernard Hopkins rematch. He's not fought any Cottos, he's not fought any Canelos, he's not fought any Mayweathers. I think for that reason and that reason only, given that the middleweight division is quite a dead division at the moment, devoid of any clear talent other than maybe 2 or 3 guys, I think he can really not afford to lose anywhere at middleweight in his next fight. Simply because if he really wants the Ward fight, if he really wanted a Mayweather fight, can you really be calling out guys from 154 to 168 and take a loss? I don't think you can. Now, if you're meant to be this feared punching machine with the highest middleweight knockout ratio of all time, or whatever it is.
All right, Adam, your turn.
So first, I'm going to tell you why it's not Golovkin, and
No,
then I'll tell you, who it is.
No, bullshit. I can argue 2 and 4 why it's not your guy. I'll just say the same things that I said about Golovkin.
Well, no, but it's important because it's not Golovkin because Golovkin is basically modern day Tyson, minus the sort of controversy and particular personality. But
being black,
prison.
He's looked incredibly dominant against limited and then ultimately kind of B grade competition. He's looked incredibly dominant and knocked all those people out. And he's looked fantastic and everybody thinks he's untouchable. But Tyson was not somebody who suffered a huge loss in paydays after he got knocked out against Buster Douglas.
Let me stop you. Tyson sold. People wanted to buy Tyson fights. Nobody wants to buy a Golovkin fight.
Oh, wow.
Carry on.
Wow. Hold on.
Carry on.
I need to catch my breath. You got me right in the mouth with that one.
Is that really a revolutionary statement? Yeah, clearly these two are on different levels. I'm talking about how they have built their name in the sport, the kind of competition that they face, and the reason that people want to watch people like that even after they suffer a loss. All right, just do me a favor and shut up and listen for a minute. The reason people will want to watch Golovkin after is because he's got that knockout power, and people want to see that knockout power, and they want to see if he can land that one shot. Now, setting that aside, I'll tell you who it is. It is Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez. And the reason that it's
who's that?
The reason
anybody gives a shit about anything under welterweight.
Exactly. Here's a guy who's getting HBO fights, who's on Jim Lampley's list, who's on, pound for pound lists, who's getting himself on undercards of significant fights. And if he suffers a loss, he goes back to obscurity where nobody pays attention beyond people like us. Nobody sees him. He goes back to totally insignificant paydays, and nobody knows who he is. If he keeps up being a dominant, undefeated champion fighting on HBO, well, he's going to get some pretty good paydays, and he's going to get a lot of exposure, and he's going to do a lot for building up sort of lower ranks of the sport. But if he loses, it's game over. Nobody's paying attention. He's going back to the backwater, and everybody focuses on welterweight and above.
What changes that? What's the difference between that and Charles Martin losing his next fight then?
One of them is guaranteed to happen.
Yep. Go on, they're both going to fade into obscurity if you lose.
Yeah, but the difference is that nobody thinks that Charles Martin's going to be a significant fider in the sport. Chocolatito already is. Gonzalez is already on pound for pound list. He's already getting HBO fights. There's not some big lucrative payday that Martin's going to be losing if he loses a fight.
Erislandy Lara was on pound for pound lists.
I don't know whose pound for pound list he was on.
Several people.
Who? Fidel Castro's?
Well, it wouldn't be Castro because he defected.
That's a good point. All right, guys.
You can't argue it's not Golovkin because people want to see him fight. People don't want to see him fight. People would have bought that pay-per-view.
How many more fighters in the sport do you think are bigger draws than Golovkin right now? I'll grant you that Golovkin's not as big a draw as Tyson, but almost nobody in the sport has been since Tyson. But who's a bigger draw than Golovkin right now?
Tyson Fury, Vladimir Klitschko, Deontay Wilder, Sergey Kovalev.
You think Kovalev's a bigger draw?
Yeah, I do.
He hasn't even had a pay-per-view fight.
Put it on pay-per-view, but it sells better. Canelo, Miguel Cotto, Manny Pacquiao, Tim Bradley.
Tim Bradley?
I don't know about that one.
Well, I bet it doesn't do worse. I guarantee you put a Bradley fight on pay-per-view.
Tim Bradley? Tim Bradley? Do you realize who you're saying? Tim Bradley?
Yeah, and do you realize that you're talking about a guy who sold the same amount as two guys who had the combined age of about 93?
Yeah, what I'm saying is there's only a handful of people in the sport who are even more popular than he is.
In a unification fight for 3-4 belts, It sold 150,000 tops. It barely broke even. Nobody wants to watch him.
Look at it this way: what percentage of people who care about him today would not care about him the day after he loses? And I think that the answer with Golovkin is probably like 85% of people who cared about him today would still care about him after he loses because they want to see him knock people out. Whereas of people who care about Gonzalez, approximately 0% of people are going to care about him tomorrow if he loses a fight.
There's enough big punches in the sport.
All right, guys. We're out of time. I do want to point out that there's some fighters that you guys missed out on that would have been. You guys could have built some funny arguments around. Deontay Wilder would have been one. I think they would have been.
I said Wilder.
But you said Golovkin. I was hoping somebody was going to argue Wilder. I mean, you could have basically said all the same stuff and just put Wilder on there. Would have gotten some laughs though.
I doubt it, because if he lost his next fight, he could just go and challenge Martin or whoever the fuck holds that IBF belt.
Yeah, but who cares about him after that?
Anybody who wants to unify the division. Anybody who cares about heavyweights. So most casuals.
No, but most casuals aren't going to care if Wilder loses his next fight because they're just going to say, oh, he's actually not the next Tyson because that's what he's been billed as, at least amongst the casuals. Let's move on to the last topic. Do we need a rematch for Mayweather versus Pacquiao in 30 seconds?
No, and anybody who says it is a complete retard.
Okay, well, there's Dean's argument. And Adam, go on.
From a competitive perspective, of course we don't. It was a very clear win for Mayweather. That said, I think you could make an argument that it's still the biggest fight that can be made in the sport and that it would be hard for the event itself to be less exciting than the original one was. There'd be a lot of pressure on them to step it up. So from that perspective, I can see why, but competitively, no way.
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with that. It might be more exciting because Mayweather doesn't seem like the type to give in.
Yeah, well, he turns every fight into a Mayweather fight, and that's why he's as great as he was. But I think you could certainly say that Pacquiao would be feeling pressure to throw more, and
he might injure his shoulder again, though.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't want to re-injure that horrific injury he suffered the first time.
Yep. So, all right, guys, we're done with this week's episode. You guys have anything you want to say to each other?
Have you met us before? No. Shout out to GiftGaff for keeping Dean with us, though.
You've used that one already. It doesn't count.
No, man.
That's not even true because Dean's connection did cut out at one point.
This well is bottomless.
I've tried to explain this to you.
No
what
end.
Part about this do you not fucking understand? It's not an internet supplier. It's not an ISP.
Yeah, clearly not.
Yeah, it's not an ISP. So you've used that argument twice, and it's going to get you twice. Unlike that bald-ass head of yours. You can argue all day about that thing.
All right, boys. Well, that's it for this week, and we'll be back at some point in the near future. Thank you for listening.
You ain't got the answers. That's your answer. You ain't got to turn up, man. This ain't no fucking show, man. I'm talking to you as a homie.
Adjourn your asses.